FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Welcome. You are listening to the Financial Survival Network. I'm Kerry Lutz. Well, hey, just when you thought it was safe to go outside, you can't go outside anymore because there's a bunch of authoritarian governors, mayors, councilmen, probably even dog catchers out there citing you, fining you thousands of dollars, and don't go outside without a face mask because you might infect the planet. Well, authoritarianism has certainly bloomed. It's in full bloom in the United States. But will there be blowback? Will there be a reaction? Will people just say no mas? Well, are you ready to say no mas? We'd love to hear from you. Email us, kl@kerrylutz.com. Well, our good friend Jeffrey A. Tucker is with us. You know him well. I've seen him at Freedom Fest many years going on now, past 10 years. Jeffrey, you are editorial director of the American Institute of Economic Research, which means you actually know something about what's going on here. And we're thrilled to have you back on. So authoritarianism, it's the dish du jour of American politics now. How much longer is this going to go on before the American people say, we've had it, we're not putting up with it, we're not staying in our homes, we're going to the beach, we're going to the Costco without a mask or whatever? When's the breaking point?
Well, I think it's already happened, actually. Atlanta opened up a few days ago, but it turns out that most of the businesses had already opened up, even without the governor's permission. They had been operating basically in secret or just casually. Now they can officially open, but they had already opened on their own. And I'm seeing this all over the country. New Hampshire, the same situation. Vermont, certainly. In Michigan, the overreach there was so outrageous that governor will certainly be thrown out of office. Actually, I'm living in one of the most compliant areas of the country, Western Massachusetts, which is one of the oldest areas of the country. You'd think the love of life, liberty, and property would be more fierce here than ever, but that's not true. The problem is that I think our adherence to life, liberty, and property over the centuries has given this area a culture of, let's just go along with everything. The authorities that are around us know what's best. And so initially the response was very much of a compliance culture. And so everybody's screaming at each other for failing to socially distance and so on. And people are dressing up like, they're members of the Taliban and so on to protect themselves. But that is all melted now, too. And I'm speaking now in week 6 of this disgusting charade. And people are getting out and people are relaxing and people are no longer putting compliance first. So I think this is a very important lesson here for most Americans. We've learned that our leaders in this country are tin-pot dictators and that they think nothing of taking control of our lives, our property, our liberties, restricting our travel, destroying our jobs, wrecking our businesses, and pillaging us with spending plans and monetary inflation. I mean, that's what we've learned. I don't think even you and I, who are kind of rebels against this system anyway, had any idea how far the ruling class was willing to go. We didn't know that it was even possible. We thought that there were courts and a constitution and certain legal precedent that would make something like this impossible. But we were wrong. Totally wrong. And it's shocking. Florida is not really a place where people are that compliant where I am, but they've complied with this. But now I really feel like everybody's had it. I mean, to me, I'm like willing to take a ride up to Georgia. So, it's a few hundred miles so I can get a haircut, a massage, I can get a tattoo,
if I'm so inclined. Not that I was thinking of it, but one of you out there, FSN members, suggested that I get AU tattooed on my arm. I thought that was pretty clever. I'm not really anxious to do it, but if I was going to do something, it would be the symbol for gold and silver, right? AU and AG. But the fact that people have put up with it to this point, but finally, it looks like
it's going away. And I'm looking now. We've learned a lot of things about the media too. The way the media blew this thing up, starting in the first week of March or so, starting with the New York Times most especially, but then bleeding out to all of them, MSNBC, CNN, and even Fox got in the act because they make a lot of money from outrageous alarmism, same as they do during hurricanes or any other natural disaster. But this one, they abused their power over the American public mind to just outright lie to people day after day after day. Every day it was, you're all going to die. We're all going to die. We need to hide in our hovels and turn on the boob tube and stare. That was the message from the media for the last 6 weeks. And so they've been totally discredited. We've all learned that we have to look for alternative sources of information. And that's our saving grace. You can't trust any of the mainstream press at this point. They're just entertainers. I think we've realized that. The blowback against the experts, the experts were predicting upwards of 2.2 million deaths and more.
Correct. Yeah.
None of which materialized. And it's that threw the ruling class into a panic and got the media all frenzied up. And now those experts have been revealed as charlatans, which is, I think, wonderful, especially Neil Ferguson of the Imperial College of London, who is utterly and completely disgraced at this point. And also, there's other institutions that are going to die as a result of this. The educational bureaucracy, which, had looked down on homeschooling, and it existed under the cloud in almost every state. And then overnight, suddenly the homeschooling became mandatory. Like, how do you explain that? So that's going to get torn up. And also the regulators and their restrictions on testing. Well, guess what? We didn't have tests, even though we had watched all the events in China for a full month, really 3 months before it finally arrived here. And we didn't have time to get tests out there so people could find out if they had this disease or not. The CDC screwed that up. The FDA screwed that up.
Fraud.
Yeah, and so there's all these institutions that are going down, I think, after result. And most especially, I think it's going to be the political class. And I promise you, well, here's what's going to happen in 6 months, a year, or 2 years at the very outset. Everybody running for political office in this country, it's all states at state level and at the national level, for the Senate, the House, President, are going to have to explain all the ways in which they were against the lockdown. That's what's going to happen. And anybody who has defended the lockdown will be kicked out of office. And we're going to see so many heads roll as a result of this thing.
Yeah, it really, I just look at it. This event was really the mother of all clickbait. They just panicked the whole populace, got them running. When you're in fear, you can't think critically. Critical thinking and fear cannot exist in the same brain at the same time. Just can't do it. So they petrified them. And now we look, and that guy Ferguson originally said 550,000 deaths in the UK. Then they revised this study, which is the basis for all of the lockdowns all over the country. A month ago, Jeff, they revised it, or maybe it's 5 weeks. They revised it down to 20,000 people, no more than 20,000 people in the UK, and that half or more of them were going to die anyway because they were literally on death's door. And how do you justify that? You just can't justify it. This whole thing is just turned into a massive fraud. But it's amazing, Jeff. There's still people that believe in the efficacy of it, and you can't talk to them.
Partially that's because of the news media is not reporting the reality. I had written, I think now about 2 weeks ago, after an actual factually based Imperial College study came out about the demographics of death. And it turns out that the turning point for likelihood of fatalities from COVID is 70 years old and having 2 or more comorbidities, so heart disease, diabetes, and so on. Now, which means basically that 80% of the population, depending on which country, faces little or no danger from this thing at all. So once the demographics started coming out, I think that the jig was up, as they say. That was it, because you suddenly realize, okay, so the people who have to fear the death from this virus are those with very low life expectancy. Okay, so that is something that John Onidas from Stanford had said back in February, but it had been confirmed by late March or early April by empirical studies on the ground that these were in fact people that died. Now, the news media never wanted to talk about this because they knew that once people got rational and clear about the actual nature of this disease, that they would relax and say, why did we close the schools? Why did we close the businesses? How come the shoe stores had to close, but I can buy shoes at Walmart? I mean, nothing about any of this stuff made any sense.
Yeah, you can go to Walmart and buy a flat screen, but Best Buy, well, you can go, they have curbside service, but you can't go in the store to buy a flat screen. But that's protection. That's protecting the people. New York State did a detailed analysis of 7,000 people that died from COVID-19. And they found that 99.2% of them had comorbidides, at least one or two. And the other 0.8 they couldn't figure out. So that's of 7,000 people. And then when you look at finally they're doing random testing, and we're finding out that the rate of infection is probably 100-fold higher than they had ever anticipated, which means the mortality rate of this is probably right around what every, common influenza takes every year. And then you wonder, how do we get here? And then they closed down these hospitals, the damage they've done, the damage to the monetary system. Let's talk about that. Yeah. Your take. I mean, we're just creating trillions of dollars of currency units out of thin air. The jig is going to be up at some point here. What is a dollar going to be worth?
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next.
Arcana Corporation is on the verge of bringing the world's highest grade silver mine into production. The Revenue Virginius mine in Colorado has proven improbable silver reserves grading nearly 37 ounces per ton silver, with an all-in sustaining production cost of only US $8 per ounce of silver. The mine is fully permitted with infrastructure already in place, and the company has announced they plan to commence production in 2020. Achieving successful production usually results in a significant upward share price re-rating on the Lassonde curve. Arcana trades under the ticker AUN in Toronto and AUNFF in New York. To learn more, go to arcana.com. That's AURCANA.com.
The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Well, this is the biggest uncertainty we face, I would say, is in the quality of the money. Now, the Fed has some smart people around, and they learned from 2008. There was a huge effort to capitalize the banks with fake money, but then they began to suck it out by paying high interest on deposits at the Fed to prevent inflation. So I think you'll have a lot of anti-inflationary sort of attitudes at the Fed. And they're going to be watching this, I would say. But at this point, it's going to be very difficult to sop up this liquidity. It's also a problem that the Fed has, in an unprecedented way, started to buy anything and everything in sight. Now, my old friend Murray used to point this out, that there were no legal restrictions on what the Fed could buy with its fake money. But now they're buying, municipal bonds, stocks, stakes in small business. So they were doing all sorts of insane things right now, which is a kind of a quasi, I wouldn't call it nationalization. It's something else, but it's unprecedented. And I don't know, the effort to fix the damage they've done. And by the way, none of this has done any good, by the way. I mean, you can't stimulate an economy that's been forced shut by law. I mean, that's just dumb.
Yeah, it's madness. It's an act of sheer madness.
Yeah, it's like chopping off somebody's legs, chopping off a runner's legs, and then giving them amphetamine so they'll run faster. Well, That's not going to work. It's going to kill the patient. It's going to kill the guy. So that's basically crazy. What the Fed and Congress have done. And the disaster that Congress has created with their spending plans, with these ridiculous amounts of unemployment. Like right now, it's actually difficult for restaurants that are reopening, even to recruit workers, because people make a lot more money just being couch potatoes, living off unemployment than they ever would from going to work. So it's a problem. You're going to take a pay cut by going to work? That's weird.
Yeah, disincentive to work. I mean, in Massachusetts, you can get the $600 weekly benefit for 14 weeks, and I guarantee you they're going to extend it. There's not even a question. I will bet $1,000 right now it'll be extended at least for 14 more weeks, and maybe for half a year. And then in Massachusetts, you could already get up to $1,153 a week, depending on what your income level was and how many dependents you have. So you could have conceivably somebody who was making $60,000, $75,000 a year, and now with unemployment, it'll go on for perhaps 26, 30, 38 weeks, whatever, 52 weeks, and they'll be getting more after-tax pay than they were before. And that's for a relatively well-compensated employee. For the dishwasher who is making $400 a week take-home, they'll be pulling in $800, $1,000. You have to be crazy to go back to washing dishes.
Meanwhile, people who weren't actually laid off but were independent business people who had their businesses destroyed, they can't get these unemployment benefits, actually, because they were never laid off from anywhere. They just had their lives destroyed. So these people are sinking into poverty. It's tragic. I sent out a message out of my Twitter profile yesterday asking for stories of the psychological toll of this, and I got about 150 emails in, and people telling individual stories of grotesque levels of abuse at the hands of government over the last 6 weeks. And I don't mean directly; I mean it's like indirect. Well, it's just so sad, and just the amount of sadness and the devastation. The people up to now have generally assumed that they were in charge of their lives, that they could make choices and they could travel, they could choose a profession, they could go into business for themselves, that they basically had self-mastery and were in charge of their futures. And then one day, government just showed up and said, "Nope, your future belongs to us," and that's it. And that's a terrible realization to have.
And then you got Comrade de Blasio and Comrade Newsom over in California setting up snitch lines. Garcetti setting up snitch lines, and then they're blasted with porn and all sorts of obscenities and everything else, and they can't understand why anyone would do that. It's like we're emulating the Stasi here, or the KGB with turn your neighbor in for not social distancing. I mean,
isn't it crazy? You'd swear that Americans had never read George Orwell or ever watched any kind of dystopian television show or movie. That people would have so easily fallen into all the traps that we've warned about for years, and they just like lemmings, jumping off this whole thing. For a while, anyway. I think a lot more people have actually been recruited onto the side of liberty just watching what's happening. And look, I have people who have been, on the center left their whole lives, mainstream reporters and things, writing me privately, going, "Oh my God, I just had no idea how rotten the government is, and now I understand why you're a libertarian." They've been saying
no idea. What world had they? But I guess the government has been benefiting them. Yeah. They were doing well. And now even the media, the mainstream media, is falling to shreds because they forgot, hey, you attack business and you try to destroy business. And then what happens when the government joins the cause? You wind up not getting any advertising. And then that's the lifeblood, the mother's milk of the media is ad revenue. But when you destroy the underlying economy, then your ad revenue disappears and then you implode. I mean, this is kind of like that heroin addict that just keeps upping the dose and figures they can get on through life. They're like upping the dose of socialism and then it hits them, and then they're the first to go. It's
well, I think you make a really interesting point, and I've been a little bit mystified about this too. Like I think initially the press thought, well, this is a great disaster. We can get everybody paying attention to us. We go listening to the radio, watching us on television, and so on. We'll sell more newspapers. That general attitude, but I think you're right that there was a kind of a short-sightedness here, and then just about 3 weeks ago, the ad revenue began to fall dramatically for all these publications, and people started getting worried. And it was about that time when the New York Times started dialing back its outrageous, ridiculous, preposterous lie-filled coverage that they had pursued since early March.
Oh yeah, I've got proof of what they did. They have a map called it's a map of the United States, places where cases are rising fastest. All right. And I've watched this map daily because it really showed that the intensity and the rising rates were declining rapidly. And so it was color coded, and I'll send you the charts because you'll get a kick out of it. So up to that point on April 20th, the darkest spot represented cases doubling in up to 3 days. And then the next darkest was 5 to 7 days, and then 7 to 10 days. They changed it. They changed the scale so that the darkest color became up to 7 days. And then the next darkest became 7 to 14. And then over 20 was the least. And the map was, and I woke up one day and I didn't notice the scale. And I said, there's something wrong with the map, because the map, it just totally changed overnight. And finally I looked at it. I said, that scale changed, and they didn't mention it. Nothing. It's just classic fraud. And they just want this thing to go on and on. And obviously they're fulfilling some mission, but it's not the mission of their shareholders. It's not the mission of management. It's a mission of propaganda here.
Yeah. Well, I think, honestly, I don't want to sound overly cynical here, but I'm sure this has occurred to you, that initially the mainstream media thought this was a great chance to get Trump.
Yeah.
After impeachment failed, they thought, okay, what's going to be our next time up at bat? And they thought this would be a nice one. So they decided to really move in on this. And I think that created a level of wreckage that even they didn't expect to create, actually. Yeah. And also, it's not clear that it's hurting Trump. No. I think Trump has been mostly idiotic on this. But the thing is, he's been slightly better than most of the governors.
Well, he's kind of in a no-win situation. Because if he said, just go to work, and then there's every person that died, there would be a headline. Yeah. And if he doesn't do it, if he goes along with it, then he's destroyed the economy. Yeah. And, my feeling is the economy could conceivably bounce back a lot faster than anybody believes possible, because everybody rebels against this nonsense and just goes about their business. I've encouraged people for weeks. I said, what is the definition of a vital or essential business? It's every business is vital to the person who owns it and to the employees that make their livelihood from it. So there's no such thing as a non-essential business other than what the government does. If the business wasn't essential, it wouldn't exist. It would have gone out of business.
That's right.
Right? I mean, that is insulting and demeaning, and really, it's essential when the government comes with its handout for the taxes, but then it's not essential in the time of a lockdown. It's really aggravating. I hope that you're right, Jeff, and that the world is catching on to this and is rebelling against it. I think to some extent you're correct. You see, it doesn't matter if it's red states, blue states. People are protesting, demonstrating about it, and they're outraged, as well you should be. So really appreciate you coming on and sharing your thoughts with us, Jeff. Just tell us, where's the best place to find your work and to connect with you on the web?
Well, thank you for asking. Yes, if you go to the American Institute for Economic Research website, it's AIER.org. We have now, I think we're up to 200 articles published on this topic.
Wow.
And we're publishing on it every single day. We've been a major source for people from the beginning. My first article on this topic was written January 27th, and I said the quarantines were coming, and people didn't believe me. And I linked to the CDC website and said, look, here's the plans for quarantine right here. And people were like, look, you're a crazy alarmist. Well, but anyway, so yeah, we've been after this, and so I'd be grateful for anybody to just go to the site and subscribe to our daily email. Thank you.
Absolutely. I've been reading it religiously, and I got to agree with you. Like, I didn't really think they were going to do it, but then when I watched what was happening in the rest of the world, I said, they're going to do it, and they did. And the pointlessness of it, the just pure economic destruction that they've reaped is worse than anyone could have ever imagined. Anyway, guys, email us, kl@kerrylutz.com, kl@kerrylutz.com. I want to hear your stories, how you've been damaged. I've heard from a lot of you, businesses shutting down, trying to get the illusory PPP government grants that have all been stolen by larger companies and favored customers of the banks. All of these things, case of outrage, and hopefully none of you out there will take it sitting down. kl@kerrylutz.com. financialsurvivalnetwork.com. Jeff, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on.
Be in touch. Thank you.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.